Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
Good morning. We're a talky bunch this morning. On behalf of Ed Bacon, I'm happy to welcome you to the Rector's Forum this morning. And special welcome to those of you in your jammies and your yoga pants who are watching at home by streaming. We're jealous of how comfortable you are. This is I've been looking forward to this forum for months. Many of us in this room first heard of Paul Zak in a sermon of Ed's a few months back in reference to the power of hugs and how they can make us healthier and happier. It was one of the huggiest Sundays in the history of All Saints Church. I don't think I got out of here with under 300 hugs. So it was a great Sunday, and it made us really anxious to have Paul come and speak to us about his work. Dr. Paul Zak is professor of economics and department chair and teaches economics management and psychology at Claremont Graduate University. His research and teaching integrates neuroscience and economics into a new discipline, neuroeconomics, and he is the founding director of the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies at CGU. Dr. Zak also serves as professor of neurology at Loma Linda University Medical Center and is a senior researcher at UCLA. He has degrees in mathematics and economics from San Diego State University, a PhD in economics from the University of Pennsylvania, and postdoctoral training in neuroimaging from Harvard. Dr. Zak's lab discovered in 2004 that an ancient chemical in our brains, oxytocin, not to be confused with OxyContin, which I've done about 10 times since reading this book, this hormone that makes us care about each other and about strangers in tangible ways and allows us to determine who to trust. His latest book, The Moral Molecule, and I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It is so entertaining. You don't need to be a neuroeconomist or a neuroscientist to understand it. It's written for all the rest of us. It's funny and it's very inviting, and he's going to make you want a copy. And fortunately, we have a bunch over there for sale. Encourage you to start your Christmas shopping. It's the season. It's a lively tale of his discoveries about oxytocin and a wonderful journey into the great mysteries of human behavior. He's a contributor to the Huffington Post. I commend an essay I just read this morning called Why Love Sometimes Sucks, which you might enjoy. And he has a blog titled The Moral Molecule at Psychology Today, which has got all kinds of wonderful things that you're going to want to read. Just last week, he was quoted in a humorous piece in the LA Times about General Petraeus and how oxytocin might have kept him from straying. And you might want to check that out also. So we're in for a real treat. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Zak.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm so happy to be here. First, I want to thank Christina, Reverend Bacon, and all of you for the wonderful Christian virtue of forgiveness. Some of you may remember I was scheduled to speak in July, and my publicist in New York had booked another event for me in LA the same day. And of course, since she's in New York, the whole world runs on New York time, we know that. So there was a time mix-up in which I had to be two places at one time. And because the other event was booked first, that one, and so I, at the last minute, stepped out in July. So thank you for still coming back to hear me. Okay, so we're going to talk a little about the underlying biological basis for good and evil, which is something I spent 10 years in my laboratory running experiments on to try to find out if there's an underlying biological basis for what I think is the longest question humans have had since humans have been having debates, which is, what is our human nature? And we have some really amazing insights, and we'll talk a little about religion towards the end too, right? So, and I'll have time for questions as well. Okay, let's see. So I want to start out with a description of an interview that I had with a woman in the San Diego County Jail. I'm going to call her Lisa. Lisa was in her mid-40s. She had recently pled guilty for possession of methamphetamine for sale. She had probably pled for this 12 or 13 times. So she was homeless. She supported herself by selling meth, was a low-level meth user. So I was in this very small room with her, really uncomfortably close. My knees are almost touching her knees. And she's in an orange jumpsuit. Her hands and feet are shackled together with silver chains. And we're part of a team trying to assess kind of how she got where she is, and could we make some suggestions that might help change her life course. So we'll go through this long clinical interview. When did you first start using marijuana? Age 13. When did you first start using methamphetamine? Age 13. So I asked the natural question, what happened in your family when you were 13? And she said, oh, my mother was a meth user, and she wanted someone to party with, so she decided to smoke meth with me. So this woman had been raped because of methamphetamine, had prostituted herself because of methamphetamine. She had married a man who was a meth user who beat her regularly, once actually fracturing her skull and almost killing her. She had 2 teenage children who lived with relatives in a state far away, and she was homeless, right? All because of this decision by her mother. So after she told me this, she paused, and she started crying, and she said, and now when my mother calls me in prison and says I love you to me, I can't say it back to her. So, breaking all appropriate clinical protocol, I said to her, I don't think you have to. Your mother did a terrible thing to you. Right? So, this leads to 2, I think, really important questions. One is, how can the bond between mother and child be broken? Right? How does that most essential of caring relationships break down? But then more generally, why aren't any of us nice to anybody else? Right? If we can't be nice to our own children, how can we be nice to friends, to complete strangers? So this is what I spent 10 years of my life trying to understand by running experiments in my laboratory and in the field. And as Christina said, I happened on this molecule oxytocin, which at the time, 10 years ago, was only known in human beings to facilitate birth and breastfeeding in women. Yet there was this very rich animal literature suggesting that in social animals, like us, oxytocin release signals safety. It says, oh, that's Christina. She's never scratched me or kicked me or bit me, so my brain releases oxytocin and so we can interact, right? So it's a sort of safety signal. So I thought, gee, going from safety to morality, maybe that sort of runs on a continuum, right? Maybe if I feel safe. So anyway, I started doing these experiments. There were a lot of technical hurdles to measure oxytocin. It's a very shy molecule. You sort of coax it out of the brain. It has a very short half-life. Because I don't want to leave, if this truly is the moral molecule, and I hope to convince you of that, I don't want to leave this switch on permanently, because I might run into dear Barbara in the front row, who we know is a very scary person. I might have to fight with her, right? So we want to modulate our behavior. And so scientists have known for a long time sort of about the negative side of human behavior, fear, aggression. Those are easy to provoke in the laboratory. We really didn't have a sense of the other side of our human nature, which is, why are we kind? Why are we charitable? Why are we compassionate? Why are we fair? And so that's what we set out to study. So I want to show you a couple of videos of some of the crazy experiments we've run to try to really understand this, because I think videos are worth more than 1,000 words. So I've got to do this out of PowerPoint. Let's see. I'm a Mac guy, so you know when you go from Mac to PC, everything goes nuts. Okay, here we go.
Most people plan to make their wedding special, but this wedding in southern England was a first for science. Nick and Linda invited researcher Paul Zach to take blood samples from them and their guests. It was a chance to find out what goes on in people's bodies during this momentous bonding event.
The value of doing this as a field study is that we have an actual real-life event. So this way we actually go in a very natural setting, a wedding with 100 people, some of which knew each other, some of which didn't know each other.
13 people, including the bride and groom, had their blood drawn before and after the couple took their vows. Zach wanted to find out if there would be a rise in their oxytocin, a hormone associated with love, trust, and bonding.
We thought maybe during this wedding ceremony, people are bonding to each other and they're actually releasing oxytocin. So we measured oxytocin, and we also measured a bunch of other hormones that were also associated with reproduction.
Zach found that the couple and close family members had more extreme changes in oxytocin.
Linda had the biggest spike in oxytocin, 28% increase in oxytocin before and after her vows. So she's really feeling the love. Who's next? The bride's mother. Of course the bride's mother is very engaged emotionally. And then the groom's father. And then the groom. And then further out are some just random friends that we pulled.
Testosterone is linked to sex drive, and studies have found that it drops when men fall in love. Zach expected this to happen at the wedding too, but results proved otherwise.
We also found that testosterone levels were flat for all the men who we tested, except for the groom. So immediately after the vows, his testosterone levels doubled from beforehand. Why is that? You have this beautiful woman wearing a gorgeous strapless gown, and he's thinking about the honeymoon.
According to Zach, the most important finding was that just being part of a wedding makes us release oxytocin. This may help explain why most people choose to have a wedding instead of eloping with their partner.
I think the ritual evolved because we all have a stake in sustaining the human race. Bride and groom have a built-in set of people who are emotionally engaged with them, who care about the outcome. About some of the laboratory experiments we've run in a minute, but I think this wedding gives us two important points. One is that we're releasing oxytocin all the time, and so we've designed a set of rituals like weddings that can cause the release of oxytocin. So that's the first point. The second point is that the pattern of release, which wasn't so clear from the video, so I'll restate that, tells us about the strength of human relationships. So who's the center of the wedding solar system? The bride. She had the largest increase in oxytocin. Then her mother, then the groom's father, then the groom, then the family and the friends. So they're arrayed around the bride like planets around the sun. Right? So it tells us about the kinds of relationships people have with each other. Right? So why do I have a wedding? Because I'm engaging these people emotionally in the ceremony, and by extension, in embedding them emotionally into investing in this couple so they can be successful at reproducing, being successful, being happy. So all of a sudden I have a built-in group of people. How do I know that? I never met the bride and groom in my life. The bride was a reporter for the New Scientist magazine who had been following my research for years and said, hey, could we do an experiment at my wedding? So we designed this, after I tried to talk her out of it, of course. And what happens? They become close friends of mine because I went to their wedding, I took their blood, I saw them a couple months ago. Actually taking blood is very intimate. So people, blab. Okay, so I was in England a couple months ago. I had dinner with her husband, and their little child. She's pregnant again with a boy. I had recommended they name it Paul, but that's just me. So we formed this relationship. Even though I know about oxytocin, I can't suppress it. So it's a really ancient molecule. It's responsible for those hallmarks of mammals, live birth and care for offspring. But in humans, this system is kind of hyperactive, right? We are finding social interactions everywhere we look, including with things that aren't even human, like our pets, or who's named their cars, right? So, yeah, we get very engaged in anything that moves around and seems to have a relationship with us. So, okay, so, so as we started running these laboratory experiments, I have to tell you, when it comes to asking people to relate how they're feeling, what they've done in the past, I'm a total skeptic, right? So if I just ask you, all you wonderful good people, do you donate to charity? Sure. Feed the homeless? Yes. So, soup kitchens? Oh, sure. So people have this, sort of notion that, they want to have others think well of them. So in the laboratory, instead of just asking people, hey, are you a good person? Do you help other people? We instead are a little bit, more careful or maybe more mean. We tempt them with virtue and vice by putting money on the table. So we do these experiments in which and we never deceive people, right, because we're the moral behavior guys. We say, look, here's some cash. We're going to take your blood, or maybe we're going to shoot a drug up your nose, get into your brain, and we're going to pay you $40. And before you leave, you can share some of that with some other stranger in the lab who you can't see or can't talk to. So then I can quantify how much you care about yourself versus another person. Or in other experiments, we're going to pay you $40. Would you like to donate some of that money to charity? Okay, so we can get these objective measures of what we call moral behaviors, which are essentially positive social behaviors, right? So again, the wedding is a fun example that shows us that what we find in the lab really works outside in the field. But for most of the laboratory studies, we're very precise about how to measure moral behaviors. And what we found is that oxytocin release, either the brain's own release of it or shooting synthetic oxytocin into your brain, we can turn on these moral behaviors like turning on a garden hose. We can induce people to be more generous, more compassionate, more trustworthy, more honest than they would baseline. Right? So we've really identified, I think, this important missing element that helps us navigate through the sea of strangers in which all of us live. So we know the fear-aggression side, but we also have this very evolutionarily old, deep side for goodness that tells us, hey, it's important as a social creature to behave in a moral way, because if you don't, the other humans tend to shun you. They don't want to be around you, and that tends to be maladaptive for social creatures. So flip that question on its head. How do we punish the worst people in society who continue to misbehave, prisoners in jail? Right? Besides execution, how do you punish them? Solitary confinement, right. So people in solitary hallucinate very rapidly. They're physiologically and psychologically stressed. Social creatures do not like to be isolated. So it seems like this hyperactive oxytocin connection system that we have really sustains us in social groups. What it means is that because of this, unlike just about every other creature, we like to affiliate with strangers. It's actually fun to be in a big city like Pasadena or LA or New York. It's kind of exciting. Things are going on. You're meeting people. You're hanging out, going to bars and coffee shops. Right? It's really interesting. Right? Chimpanzees don't do that. Rodents don't do that. Dolphins don't do that. But we do it. But the only way we can pull that off is to know very rapidly, not perfectly, but have something in our head that says, this person's safe, this person not. Or here's the appropriate social behavior, here's not. And then we've called those appropriate social behaviors moral behaviors. Okay, so I want to tell you a couple more things, and then I'll take time for questions. So one of the questions we struggled with a number of years ago was, what is the subjective experience that you have when your brain releases oxytocin? So one of my graduate students, now a faculty member with me at Claremont, developed this little video. This is a little boy named Ben, and Ben has terminal brain cancer. So I'm not going to show this video to you. It's really sad. It runs about a minute and a half. And the last time I showed it publicly was at a law conference at UCLA. And after I showed it, several lawyers were actually crying. And you guys know that lawyers don't have souls, right? So, sorry. Some of my best friends, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so it's a very sad video. It is a sledgehammer oxytocin producer. So on average, people have about a 50% increase in oxytocin. And then when you have these share the money tasks or donate to charity tasks, they are just giving money away like crazy. All right. So, but after we watch this, so you come in, you get a blood draw, you watch this video, tell us how you feel, get another blood draw, and then you do some tasks. And we asked them about their subjective feeling states. We found that this video elicited two feelings primarily: distress and empathy. And the distress response was associated with an increase in stress hormones, but the empathy response was associated with an increase in oxytocin. So the point here is that it's empathy that makes us moral, right? It's empathy that guides us. Right? So if I have empathy, if I share feelings with you, I do something that hurts Christina's feelings, and she's sad, I'm getting sad too. And I don't like to be sad. I like to be happy. And so the humans are giving me feedback all the time on what's appropriate. And because we're social creatures, we're highly empathic creatures, and that feeling state helps us modulate our appropriate behaviors. Who doesn't do this well? Kids, teenagers, right? People who are still learning about the appropriate behaviors. And we spend a lot of time teaching kids, share with your brother and sister, right? We have to reinforce this brain system. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Okay, so why are we ever good? Could be God's watching us. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Could be the government's watching us, Big Brother. I don't see any, well, there must be one camera in here, I'm being filmed, but, right? So a lot of the time, no one's watching us, and we still see a lot of good behavior, right? So this story I just told you about empathy is actually not a new story. I mean, now we have science behind it. But a philosopher named Adam Smith, who you may remember from your first economics course, the father of economics, wrote this book, The Wealth of Nations, which actually was his second best book. 17 years before that book, in 1759, he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in which he laid out essentially the same theory I just told you, which is humans are social creatures. As social creatures, we share emotions with others. And because we share emotions, we tend to do things that avoid giving others pain and do things that bring others joy, so we can share that joy. So this guy was a weirdo, I have to tell you. He lived with his mother until she died, often would go out of the house in his pajamas, thinking deep thoughts. He was a moral philosopher in Scotland. And after he published this book, he is a rock star, you guys. 1759, he's going to have dinner with the King of France. He's hanging out with Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, because he had the first fully developed theory of morality, right? And so that theory has largely been forgotten. But as I started doing this work, I said, where's the context for what I'm doing? And I went back and read all these philosophical discussions of where morality comes from, and it seems to be that Smith was closest to what we found scientifically, that we have what he called moral sentiments. We have these feelings that tell us what's right and wrong. Okay, so this is actionable neuroscience. How does this moral molecule fail? So now the thousands of people I've taken blood from, we find 95% actually release oxytocin when someone treats them well, and oxytocin motivates them to reciprocate in kind. So what is that? That's just the golden rule, right? So the golden rule exists on every culture on the planet, and that's what oxytocin does. It says, they're being nice to me, boom, I'll release oxytocin, I'll be nice back to them. That's what the humans like. Okay, so when does it fail? It fails under high stress. You guys know this. When you're really stressed out, are you your best self? Are you nice and warm and kind and sweet? No. Right? Anyone ever yell at someone they care about? Yeah, what's the deal there? Right? So stress puts us into survival mode, and we are trying to do anything we can do to get through the next 20 minutes. Right? So then what do you have to do if you've yelled at your spouse, your colleagues? The next day you go back and say, forgiveness. I was a big jerk yesterday. I'm sorry. I was having a very bad day. I took it out on you. And then we repair those relationships. Okay? So another potent oxytocin inhibitor is the most important chemical to half the people in this room, which is testosterone. So testosterone inhibits the sympathetic response. Who are the least empathic people on the planet? Teenage boys, right? I used to be one. Okay. This can be very adaptive, right? If you want to go to war, if you want to kill a furry animal for food or move a giant nasty boulder, get a young guy to do it, right? Don't care so much. But it turns out in these experiments, we administer testosterone to men. Not only are they more selfish than themselves on placebo, they're much more likely to spend their own resources to punish others who are non-cooperative. They want to enforce the rules. Guess what? 85% of the U.S. military is male. Women, you guys can do this job. We love it. Really, we love enforcing the rules. Okay, so now we have this sort of two sides of morality right inside our bodies. We have oxytocin that connects us to others, makes us feel their emotions, and we have testosterone that motivates us to inform people when they're violating these moral, at least implicit moral norms. Other inhibitors for oxytocin that we found are adverse childhood histories. So in studies we've done of women who have been sexually abused, repeatedly sexually abused as children, we find about half of them don't release oxytocin when someone shows them a kindness, and they have highly impaired social behaviors. There's a whole chapter on the book on the clinical implications of the work we've been doing and the clinical trials we're involved in, from autism to schizophrenia, depression. And the short answer is you need a lot of stress to actually have the system shut down. It's a very ancient part of your brain, so it's pretty robust. But when it breaks down, it can break down very badly. So in the book, I talk about one woman in the study. It's a very long study. We measure oxytocin release, image people's brains, measure their genes, who was a 21-year-old sexual abuse survivor, and she killed herself in our study. And she just had a terrible life. She couldn't kind of pull herself out of this. The other people we find who don't have this oxytocin response are individuals who seem to be born with bad genes. So we found these just randomly, these people who just don't respond at all, and when we psychologically profile them, they look like psychopaths. So psychopaths classically lack empathy. They don't share emotions with others. They're in permanent survival mode. They're about 2% of the U.S. population. They make up between 25 and 40% of the U.S. prison population. They're dangerous, and I recommend you avoid them. You're also not going to fix them because we have evidence that the receptors for oxytocin are dysfunctional or missing in these individuals. So we can't even replace the oxytocin. It's not going to have an effect. Okay, so I'm going to conclude with a couple statements about religion. So as I started writing this book, I had to come to terms with why I spent 10 years of my life doing studies on morality. And in retrospect, it's really due to this woman in the top left corner, Sister Mary Maristella, also known as my mother. My mother's a former Catholic nun and quit being a nun in the 50s for a variety of reasons. But I was an altar boy. I went to Catholic church. Church not so different than this. Carried a lot of crosses, breathed a lot of incense in. And but I started having this more holistic view of why people are good and evil. And in the Catholic view, of course, if you're not Catholic, good luck getting to heaven, right? So it's like, well, what about Buddhists? Oh, God forbid, what about Protestants, right? So, So I kind of rejected this very narrow version, parochial version, if you will, of where good and evil came from. And so I think I started doing these studies. The punchline is that in all the studies we did until about 2 years ago, I avoided every possible question having to do with religion. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to get involved. I wanted to be the science guy and not the religion guy. So as I started writing the book, I had what I call the weenie alert go off. Like, you're such a weenie. Come on. So subsequently, we have now done studies on religion. There's a whole chapter on religion in the book. And we've gone into churches and taken blood before and after services. We've gone to other rituals that capture some elements of religion, like folk dances. This picture is from the South Pasadena Women's Club, where, with permission, we took blood before and after a New England folk dance called a contra dance. Yes, contra dancers. They were great. And we've looked at things like worshiping in the lab. I'm going to show you one more video of some indigenous people I studied. And across all these studies, we have found that a majority of individuals involved in the ritual release oxytocin. And when they release oxytocin, they feel closer to their community. Interestingly, in all these studies, people do not report feeling closer to God when they release oxytocin. So whatever that sense of connection is to God, it's not an oxytocin response as far as we can tell. There's something else going on. Okay, so where does religion come in? So what we've learned so far is that our brains are living in this soup of chemicals, and 99% of what your brain does is below your conscious awareness. That's why we need to use neuroscientific tools to find out what people are doing, because they can't always report why they're doing what they're doing. So we measure the brain directly. But because we're subject to this sea of chemicals in our brains, we have to reinforce or exercise these moral behaviors. And going to church is a wonderful way to do that, right? Jesus is a fabulous role model for, a way to live a fully fulfilled life. Right? Even if you forget about heaven for a moment, who was more loving on the planet than Jesus? And maybe a couple other, great leaders from different religions. So I think the great insight from the New Testament, which is stronger in the New Testament than any other great book, religious book that I'm aware of, is this notion of just loving indiscriminately, right? Love everybody. If you love everybody, you'll release oxytocin in those individuals. They're going to love you back. This is really the molecule of love, and love is an important part of our human nature. And if we don't love, we'll be isolated, we'll be stressed, we'll die younger. Right? This is what we need, is love. So I think, again, for non-religious believers, you can still believe in love. It's still part of our human nature. It's the release of oxytocin. We do it all the time. We do it everywhere. We need it. And of course, the problem with love is that it's easy to love your family and your friends, but what did Jesus teach? Love the people who don't even want our love, who may not deserve our love, like drug addicts, like Lisa. Right? That's the hard love. Right? That's the part where you've really got to be good at this, and you need to be reinforced. You need to have support. You need to have often have faith in some higher power that what you're doing really can make a difference. But we find that difference right away. So in our studies of sexually abused women, besides oxytocin release, the number one predictor of whether they'll have good or bad life outcomes is if a single person takes an interest in their welfare. A grandmother, an aunt or uncle, a minister, anybody who says, you're important, you're valuable, and I care about you, right? And the love I'm talking about here really is philia. Love's a complicated word. This philia love, really care for others, which means I'll invest my time and resources to help you be happier. Okay, I want to leave time for questions. I'm going to leave you with a single video. So all this sounds really great, and there's all these crazy stories in the book of how unlikely it was for me to find this, and how I had no lab space, I had no equipment, I had no money, and how we sort of cobbled this whole thing together to make it work. But as we've gotten big, my lab has 35 people in it now, and we're constantly running studies. We're quite busy. I worried that everything I've told you so far, all the studies have been done in the US and in Western Europe. Is this really universal? So to find that out, I went to the farthest place from the Western world I could think of, which was the jungles of Papua New Guinea. So Papua New Guinea, as you know, is an island, it's a rainforest, is highly isolated. There are these little tiny tribes of subsistence farmers, and there are 800 distinct languages there. So they're really isolated. So I went there and looked at a ritual that they have done for thousands of
その
years.
幕が開く。
I'm just going to take it off because this was for a Japanese documentary on human evolution, and unless you speak Japanese, the words aren't going to mean much to you. So this is my village, and these are the individuals. Oh, it's because we're in PowerPoint. I'm going to just show you a little better version of that because I think it's kind of important. Oh no, sorry. Yeah. So the nice thing is that these wonderful folks from Japan said, what experiment would you like to run? Can we film it? And so they flew me to Papua New Guinea with the team, and there's no electricity, no running water. You're in the middle of a rainforest, and rainforest means like when the rain starts coming down, it's like machine gun fire. Like you have to take cover. So this is a ritual dance they have done for, again, thousands of years. I set up a little medical hut with a generator in this village. And basically, in this experiment, everything that could go wrong did go wrong, other than someone getting seriously hurt or killed. And so I basically got stuck there for a week with nothing. And so equipment failures, all kinds of things happened. And the wonderful people in Japan actually flew in some supplies we needed because there's just nothing in Papua New Guinea, so we were stranded. So we built this little tent. You can see the flowers that the native people put on the post, which is so kind. Because, again, the rain comes down, we have electrical equipment. And so we took blood before and after this experiment. Now, these people live in a rainforest. So I brought, alcohol swabs to, swab the skin before you take blood. No, one alcohol swab doesn't work. You have to use 5 or 6 just to get to skin. They don't shower. They live in a rainforest, right? They're covered with dirt. So, body odor is very strong. People using the bathroom in the woods, wherever. And after a while, you're there and there's nothing to do because I can't run the experiment. And you get used to the body odor. I start stinking too. And everyone wants to interact with me, and they all want to touch my hands. I brought all my own food because, you never know. I don't want to get sick. So they're touching my hands. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, where's the Purell? Like, I have to eat with these hands later. And then I started thinking to myself, what an absolute jerk I am. Right, here I go to this little village, 1,000 people. I feel it's my village now. They have let me in. They've shown me their sacred huts. They've shown me their houses. I've met the children. And I started playing with the kids, and everyone's laughing, and they put headdresses on me, the whole thing. And I just relaxed and started enjoying just being a human, right? Not being a scientist, just interacting. And I started thinking, how stupid are we if we can go halfway across the world and interact with the humans, but right in our own neighborhoods with people whose language we share, we can't be nice to the people around us. So I think the lesson here is that we need love. Love's part of our evolved biology. And to the extent that we feel love and practice love, we're going to be happier, we're going to be healthier, and our lives are going to be more fulfilled. And we do find that at the level of countries. We find that countries that have high levels of empathy show a lot of trust. There's more prosperity, people interact more, and they create value from social relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, or even economic value. And as you remove people from poverty, you reduce the stresses that inhibit oxytocin release. You see more moral behavior. So we see things like tolerance across countries have an income gradient, trustworthiness has an income gradient, happiness has an income gradient. So if we want to be happy and fulfilled, it's really building these social networks using oxytocin. And as Christina mentioned, one thing we've shown is that touch releases oxytocin. So any of you guys who met me before or meet me afterwards, you know that I hug everybody. And I've got the nickname Dr. Love because of that. That's great. I'm happy to encourage people to be more loving. So your recommendation from Dr. Love is 8 hugs a day. If you can get 8 hugs a day, then you're juicing this oxytocin system. You're giving this gift of connection to other people. And when you do that, you're starting this virtuous cycle in which you're releasing oxytocin, encouraging people to be calmer, to connect to others around them, and to be happier, more moral. So with that, I'll take some questions. Thank you so much for coming out on Saturday. Thank you, guys. And I'm seeing some hugging going on. I love it. Hugs are good. You know, it's really hard to be mad at someone that you've already hugged, even like your spouse. If you have of course, I've never had a fight with my spouse, but I've understood that people have fights with their spouses. And, hugs are a stupidly simple way to just get this oxytocin system to start working. So, yeah, I recommend it. Yes, sir.
Any explorations on relationships between oxytocin suppression and holding positions of power?
Great question. Yes. So if you win a chess match, your testosterone goes up. If your team on TV today loses, your testosterone goes down. And as our social status goes up, our testosterone goes up, both for men and for women. So the higher social status you are, the more your brain is whispering to you, it's all about you. You're a little mini god. Everyone should want to mate with you. Everyone should want to be like you. It becomes all about you. Again, from a genetic perspective, that sort of makes sense, right? Evolutionarily, you obviously won the social hierarchy lottery. So yeah, why isn't it all about you? So again, I think because so much of this is unconscious, I think as we gain social status, we need to work harder to exercise this connection, morality, oxytocin system. Praying for an hour on Sunday, not a bad start. Volunteering to help others in need, even better. So, there's a saying like in the addiction world, fake it till you make it. I think it's the same thing with religion, with volunteering. Even if you guys don't buy every part of the articles of faith, if you practice it, you set down these circuits in the brain, it becomes easier and easier. So I discuss in the book that I'm an introvert, so I'm not a shy person, but I just actually get tired of being around humans all the time, even though they're fascinating, I've heard. So I have worked on myself for the last couple of years to actually be better at connecting to people, things like hugging, focusing on people's emotions, and I find that it's much easier for me to relate to people now because I've exercised this. So so should we be surprised that David Petraeus, Bill Clinton, these people have affairs? No. Testosterone increases libido. It says it's all about me. But again, having said that, the decisions are finally made in the prefrontal cortex, this big enlarged area in humans, and I think we should expect decision makers to be able to sort of suppress some of these behaviors and say, hey, even though it seems like it's all about me because I'm a 4-star general, I should look at the consequences of that behavior. That's a long answer, sorry.
I'm wondering if you can comment on oxytocin levels in autistic individuals.
Great question. So in the clinical chapter, we discuss the sort of uncertainty on oxytocin in autistic individuals. Some measures suggest they're too low, some suggest they're too high. What we find in autistics is, so levels are not that important for oxytocin, it's this change, the release levels. So your brain kind of works on change. And so what we do know in autism is that this change response doesn't occur. And so, again, if I see someone who seems nice, I release oxytocin, I can interact with them. They don't get that. And people with autism tend to be also very anxious, socially anxious, but generally anxious. And so this whole system seems to be dysregulated. The punchline is that the work we've done has initiated a lot of clinical trials, including for autism. But oxytocin replacement therapy has not cured autism. In fact, the effects are fairly mild. The effects of oxytocin replacement are slightly stronger for individuals who have more severe symptoms. But the entire brain circuit that oxytocin uses is presumably dysregulated in autism. So I think one of the hopeful things is that Pfizer, the drug company, last year published research in rodents for a drug that increases the receptors for oxytocin. So not just replacing the hormone, but replacing the receptors. And that seems to be a potential great advance for people with impaired social behavior. So we'll see as that starts through clinical trials whether that can help.
Yeah, my question is kind of related to that. But what is, for the 2% that you said are psychopaths and the hardened criminals and so forth, is there other ideas circulating on how you can reach these people? And also, is there any theories about why they lack the molecule?
Great question. So most psychopaths are born that way, so it seems to be sort of spontaneous genetic disorder. There is a little bit of inheritability. If your father's a psychopath, the son may be more likely to be psychopaths. Trauma plays a role. So many of the majority of these are men. Many of the men I've interviewed have early childhood trauma. So it's probably this gene-environment interaction. But genes seem to be very compelling. So think of the sort of Jeffrey Dahmer types. So Jeffrey Dahmer was torturing animals since he was a little child and just escalated. So how to reach them, we don't really know. So I've been in some treatment facilities for psychopaths, and the number who actually, after they offend in some bad way, break the laws, they're basically in prison for life or in treatment for life, because not many of them, there's a continuum of psychopathology, but not many of them get out. So no, there's not really a great treatment. In fact, there's a study I mentioned in the book in which they taught psychopaths to be more empathic in one study, and the ones who went through the treatment compared to the controls who didn't reoffended at a higher rate. Why? Because they cognitively learned, oh, this is what the human's like, now I have another way I can take advantage of people. Isn't that terrible? Right? So, it's really tough. Now, the good news is, though, 95% of the population, most of the time, in a safe environment, releasing oxytocin, you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you. Right? Again, take out stressed out people, the crazy people, the high testosterone males. Everybody else, probably okay.
Over here.
Yes, hi.
Are there implications about how to better raise children from this?
There's a ton. So actually the final chapter is how do you use this in your daily life to improve your own relationships. So I'll give you one. I have my 10-year-old daughter here. Elkie, can you raise your hand in the front low? So I brought my 10-year-old daughter with me, and she will, thanks, that's nice. Thanks for coming, Elkie. So I'll just give you one implication because I don't want to take too much time. So I have young children, and I start thinking about the timeout. So the timeout says to children, just like prisoners in jail, you're misbehaving, we don't want to be around you. So I started thinking of the neuroscience of this. That's not consistent with the way oxytocin works. So I invented the time in. All right, you're having a bad day. You need to sit in dad's lap for as many minutes as you are old because you need more care and attention. Right? I don't want to be away from you. I want to help you do that. Now, what's beautiful about this is that my dear Elkie, 10-year-old, loves it. And my 13-year-old is scared to death I'll do it when her friends are over. So it works both ways. Thank you for that question. Yes, sir.
Some time ago I heard the Dalai Lama speaking to a group of graduate students at Stanford, and they were sharing their neuroscientific research with him. And his comment to them was that if you find anything in your science that contradicts what we believe in Buddhism, we need to change what we believe in Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if there's anything in your science that would say there are some things we need to change in Christianity, or the way we convey Christianity, especially doctrines of sin and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm afraid to touch that, actually. I'd love to have that discussion offline. I'm very conflicted. I would say I'm a hopeful Christian. I'm hopeful that everything we read and believe is going to work out. But I don't think there's a downside if there isn't. Let's suppose we're all delusional, which some atheists believe. Let's suppose that's the case. If I still live my life like Jesus, if I love unconditionally, I'm still going to be, very connected, very cared for by the others around me. I just don't think there's a downside. So I know it's Pascal's wager and all that, but I don't think there's really clear tenets that I think are clearly overturned. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. Yeah, I'll get myself in more trouble if I go further.
I'd like to ask you about the conflict today as an educator, because in schools today we are to refrain from hugging children, and this counters what we're discussing today. So would you comment on that?
I will. So my kids go to public school. I tell the story in the book. When my oldest daughter was in second grade, I take her to school. First day of school, the teacher hugs all the kids. And I was before I was hugging people. And I was like, I don't know about this. I'm not sure, you know. So the second day I lined up with the kids. And I said, well, what about parents getting hugs? And she said, give me a big hug. And I loved her since then. So I've asked her, why, and she, you know, she's grandmotherly, you know, and these are second graders. And I said, why do you hug the kids? She said, you know, I realized that when the kids do well in class, I say, oh, I touch them on the shoulder. Oh, Johnny, that was great. But some children never get that touch. They never, because they're struggling. They're just not doing that well. So this way, at least every child gets one touch every day. These are little people, right? This is what they really need. This is a kind of a maternal figure. And yeah, so I think it's very appropriate. And I think, you know, she certainly has an enlightened principle. But, you know, I think there's appropriate ways. I think you're doing that in high school, you know, hormones raging may not be such a great idea. But for little people, for sure, I think it's completely appropriate.
I think we need to bring this to an end. Are you willing to stay around?
Absolutely.
So if you have another question, Paul will be available to talk.
Right here.